Pain has a function. It tells you something's wrong. Stop touching the hot stove. Move your broken leg. Unless you're Ezzelino III da Romano, then pain is just entertainment. 1236, northern Italy. Ezzelino controlled Verona, Padua, Vicenza, called himself a lord but ruled like a king, turned his castles into something between a dungeon and a theater. Because he didn't just kill people, he needed an audience. Prisoners weren't executed, they were projects. Ezzelino would have their skin removed in strips while they were still conscious, tongues torn out. Then he'd force their families to watch as he disemboweled them, slowly, making sure everyone saw what disloyalty looked like. Rolandino of Padua, a chronicler, wrote that Ezzelino burned 12,000 people in a single day. Men, women, children, mass pyres in the town square. He laughed while they burned, but his signature move was more personal. He'd have prisoners' limbs amputated, seasoned with salt, and force them to eat their own flesh while he mocked their screaming. Not to extract information, not for military advantage, just because he could. Entire towns wiped out for perceived disloyalty. The Pope excommunicated him twice, which historically takes effort. Even his allies eventually said, "This is too much." In 1259, they captured him after a battle, wounded by an arrow. Ezzelino killed himself in prison. Not dramatically, just refused food and tore his own bandages off. Bled out over days. Dante put him in hell's seventh circle, the violent against their neighbors, submerged in a river of boiling blood for eternity. Which, considering what he did to his neighbors, feels appropriate. Medieval Italy was brutal. Everyone was brutal. But Ezzelino made people who burned heretics for a living say, "Okay, this guy's too much." That's the bar. Pain stops being functional when someone enjoys it. So, what killed 12,000 people in a single day? Technically, fire. Realistically, unchecked power, meeting a personality that enjoyed suffering the way most people enjoy music. Ezzelino III da Romano wasn't brutal because he had to be. Medieval Italy was already brutal. Everyone was torturing everyone. The Pope was burning heretics. Neighboring lords were executing prisoners. Violence was standard operating procedure. But Ezzelino, he turned cruelty into performance art. He made people eat their own limbs. Not for confessions, not for military intelligence, just because watching someone scream while chewing their own salted flesh was, fun for him for some reason. We all have our own hobbies, I guess. That's the lesson. The horror isn't that humans are capable of violence. I mean, we've always known that. The horror is that some humans enjoy it. They don't need a reason. They don't need a threat. They just need an audience and permission. Ezzelino had both. He ruled 3 cities. No one could stop him. And when you give someone absolute power and they happen to be wired wrong, you get mass pyres. You get families forced to watch disembowelments. You get a guy so sadistic that even medieval torturers, people who professionally burned people alive, said, "Okay, this is excessive." Pain has a function, unless you're the one inflicting it for applause. Then it's just Tuesday. Dante put him in hell's 7th circle, boiling blood for eternity, which honestly feels lenient. Wanna know what happens when a war hero retires? Sometimes they write memoirs, sometimes they take up gardening. Gilles de Rais chose demon summoning, with children, dead ones. Marshal of France, Joan of Arc's right hand, decorated battlefield commander during the 100 Years' War, the guy who fought at Orléans, earned a royal fleur-de-lis, and got appointed to France's highest military rank at 24. And after Joan of Arc got burned in 1431, he went home to his castles and spent the next 9 years converting peasant children into occult experiments. By 1432, children start vanishing near de Rais' castles. Not one or two, dozens, then over 100. Conservative estimates say 140. Some historians push that number past 600. His servants testified that they'd lure boys, mostly, ages 6 to 18, with promises of work or food. Peasant families, desperate enough to believe a nobleman's generosity, handed over their kids. The children got dressed in clothes worth more than their parents made in a year, ate meals they'd never seen before, drank wine mixed with stimulants to keep them awake and pliant. Then they'd be taken upstairs. What happened in those rooms? Court records from his 1440 trial don't hide the details. De Rais suspended them from hooks. He, let's just say, violated them. Then he introduced a double-edged sword to their throats while they were still aware of what their existence had become. He'd sit on their stomachs while they bled out, laughing, watching them try to bleed through the blood. After they transitioned from children to objects, he continued the assault with their bodies. Then separated their heads from the rest of them. Displayed the collection on shelves in his room, like trophies that used to blink. He'd continue to, show affection to his favorites. You know, the corpses. But wait, there's a reason for all this. See, Gilles had burned through his fortune funding a theater production about the siege of Orléans, millions of dollars in today's money, on a play about his own military career. Apparently, no one gave a damn and his little business venture failed, and he lost all his savings. So he turned to alchemy, hired sorcerers, tried summoning a demon named Baron to fix his bank account. The demon required payment, one child's soul per manifestation. Gilles killed a boy, dismembered him, stuffed the limbs in a glass jar, and waited. The demon never showed. So naturally, his solution was to kill more children. Obviously, standard problem solving. In 1437, witnesses watched his servants haul out the corpses of dozens of victims from one of his castles, just openly disposing of bodies. And no one stopped him, because he was a Marshal of France, and they were peasants trying their best to exist without becoming the next glass jar experiment. He wasn't arrested until May 15th, 1440, not for the mass murder, but for kidnapping a priest during a property argument. That's what finally triggered the investigation. A clergyman, not the 100+ dead children. Priorities. Under the threat of torture, de Rais confessed to everything, told the court, "I have said enough to hang 10,000 men." On October 26, 1440, he was hanged and burned. Before he stopped breathing, the church called his final moments a beautiful example of Christian repentance. Parents in Nantes commemorated the anniversary of his execution by whipping their own children for over a century afterward to remind them of the importance of repenting for sins. Because that's definitely the lesson here. What killed those children wasn't just one man's depravity. It was a system that prioritized status over humanity. De Rais operated for nearly a decade because his victims were disposable. Peasant children weren't people, they were resources and inventory. And when you're nobility, resources don't have rights, they have uses. His servants participated. His community whispered but stayed silent. His wealth insulated him from consequences until he violated someone who mattered. A priest, not children. A clergyman. That's the blueprint for atrocity. It doesn't need evil, just a structure that decides some lives are material and others are human. And when you exist on the material side, nobody counts how many of you go missing. Joan of Arc spent her life trying to save France. Her best friend spent his trying to summon a demon by dismembering little boys. Hey, ever wonder what happens when you seize power by pretending to protect a child emperor and then murder him? Me neither. But apparently, the child emperor's subjects would eventually return the favor with their teeth. Andronikos I Komnenos, Byzantine aristocrat, war hero, cousin of Emperor Manuel I, the guy who spent decades in exile after multiple escape attempts from prison, affairs with his cousins, and at least one incident involving cutting through a tent with a sword to avoid assassination. In 1182, at 64 years old, he marched on Constantinople, claiming he was there to protect the 11-year-old Emperor Alexios II from corrupt officials. The protection lasted about a year. Andronikos took control in April 1182. By September 1183, he'd poisoned his political rivals, strangled the boy's mother, Maria of Antioch, had himself crowned co-emperor, then strangled Alexios II and tossed his body in the sea, wrapped in lead. To secure his legitimacy, the 64-year-old Andronikos married what remained of the boy's childhood, his 11-year-old widow, Agnes of France. Nothing says legitimate succession like marrying a child whose husband you just murdered. She'd watched her husband disappear into the sea. Now she'd sleep next to the man who put him there. Then came the purges. Andronikos hated the aristocracy, saw them as corrupt, exploitative parasites bleeding the empire dry. So he decided to fix this pressing issue with, well, mass executions, blinding, and public displays of severed body parts. You know, the usual anti-corruption measures. Very administrative. Suspected of disloyalty? Blinded. Your family whispered criticism about him. Congratulations, you're now decorative architecture, impaled outside city walls. Historian Niktas Honiotes later called him Misophias, hater of sunlight, because of how many people he blinded, because he'd created a city of people who'd never see sunlight again. Some accounts say he roasted noblemen alive, then held family dinners where the main course was, well, your dad, whose charred remains he'd force you to eat. He called it a loyalty test, because apparently that's how you check if someone is on your side. Others describe him, opening up prisoners' stomachs and using what came out as, let's say, facial moisturizer. Yeah. And another record claims he, well... Okay, so there was a noblewoman. He killed her. Then he did some adult stuff with her body, in front of her family. Then fed what was left of her to his dogs. So, yeah, that happened. His reign lasted 2 years, roughly 730 days to destroy a dynasty that took a century to build. Efficient. In 1185, William II of Sicily invaded, captured Thessaloniki, and sacked it so brutally that chroniclers described it as making war on God himself. The people of Constantinople, who'd initially supported Andronikos' anti-corruption stance, turned on him. When his official, Stephen Hagiochristophoreites, tried arresting a nobleman named Isaac Angelos, Isaac panicked, killed him, and fled to the Hagia Sophia. The crowd proclaimed Isaac emperor. Andronikos tried escaping in a boat, and yeah, it did not work out. Isaac handed him to the mob. For 3 days, Andronikos was tied to a post in the street. The people of Constantinople took turns. His right hand? Gone. Teeth pulled out, one by one. Hair ripped from his scalp. One eye gouged out. Then someone threw boiling water in his face. For 3 days, he stayed awake for all of it. Then he was dragged to the hippodrome, hung upside down between 2 pillars, and torn apart. 2 Latin soldiers held a friendly competition. Whose sword could reach further into the thing that used to make imperial decisions? Competitive spirit, I guess. According to Honiotes, Andronikos stayed conscious through all of it. But the mob wasn't finished. The women of Constantinople ritually consumed pieces of his flesh, not because they were starving, because eating him meant he'd finally serve a purpose. Fuel for the living, payment for the dead, a collective act to cleanse the city of his tyranny. His body was left unburied for years, just there, rotting in public, a reminder, or maybe just because nobody wanted to touch it. Here's the thing about tyranny by purge. It doesn't solve systemic rot. It just replaces one form of violence with another. Andronikos saw the aristocracy exploiting peasants and responded with blinding and impalement. The people saw Andronikos exploiting everyone and responded with ritualized cannibalism. Violence as policy, violence as therapy, violence as the only language both sides remembered how to speak. Not, how do we fix this? Just, whose turn is it to bleed? The Comenian system he destroyed was corrupt, but his brutal replacement collapsed the empire's central authority entirely. The Angeloid dynasty that followed couldn't hold the empire together, and within 2 decades, the Fourth Crusade showed up and, well, there wasn't much left to shatter. Andronikos didn't fix anything. He just taught everyone that violence is the only conversation power understands. And once that's the lesson, it applies to everyone, including him. Andronikos spent 2 years trying to purify the Byzantine Empire with blood. His subjects spent 3 days returning the courtesy.